Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Philosophical Liberal. I paused there for a second
What
because
are
we
we
have
talking about today?
yeah,
It's been a
for those
long
of you who
day.
know, we have multiple podcasts. It's keeping it straight and we record them at all hours. You
We
wouldn't
do.
necessarily know it. But yes, to another episode of the Philosophical Liberal on Substack. How are you doing, Joy? Good to see
It's
you.
been a long day, but it's been a good day, and I'm really looking forward to this particular conversation.
Yeah, same. So, for everyone out there, if you've been following along, or even if you haven't, we are we're headlong into our statement on the meaning of philosophical liberalism that is at the top of our webpage. If you haven't visited, check it out at 1776forward.com. And we've been working through Article 1 of our three article or three-part statement. Article 1 being about human foundations in human nature at our best, and where we kind of started as we embarked on this political project. And for those of you who have been following along, or as a recap for those who haven't, Article 1 is really about defining human nature at our best through what we see as kind of critical both and fusions of seemingly competing but ultimately complementary polarities or core characteristics. We started with our core archetype of the creator trader, which in our mind is not only the ultimate expression of human nature at our best, but also kind of the ultimate both and integration of all the other great characteristics of being human. And then we moved through the four other key ones that we highlighted in the statement, and we're now on our fifth and final one, progress and order. So, as we've done for the last four, I'll read through what we had to say on that, and then we'll kind of augment that with some definitions and then dive into the discussion for today. But the question, I guess, that animates tonight's discussion or today, depending on when you watch this, is progress and order. Why do we need both? Which is the question really for all of these integrations. So we said in our statement, progress and order. Humans must grow or die seeking continuous improvement and advancement against the default of entropy and chaos. We do so by building on knowledge and institutions gained through our human heritage. So that's what we said. And then, if you're like me, I'm a stickler for definitions. Joya might even call me Mr. Definitions. Uh, so whenever I dive into a topic, and I think actually methodologically, this is core to what we mean when we say taking a first principles approach to things, is start at the most fundamental root of whatever problem you're facing. And what could be more root than defining your terms? So I ask, what do these two words mean? Progress and order. And so we thought we'd kind of augment what we wrote with some definitions. I'll read first from kind of the dictionary definition, and then I wrote my own to kind of expand on it, and which in a way that I think will point towards what we're getting at in our statement here. But the dictionary.com or the dictionary.com app definition for progress is, and as with most definitions and most words today that have multiple meanings, there's multiple definitions. I'll kind of pull out the one or two that I think are kind of most encompassing or touch upon the most common kind of colloquial usage of the word. Dictionary.com for progress says movement toward a goal or to a further higher stage, and then growth or development, continuous improvement, advancement in general, and the development of an individual or society in a direction considered more beneficial than and superior to the previous level. So that's kind of, I think, largely a kind of context neutral definition that speaks to, kind of just progression in a kind of upward or superior enhancing way. And then what I wrote for progress as I was mulling this question of what does it mean to me or mean in my own understanding, I wrote a general improvement in the conditions of each individual human and the aggregate group of humans as a whole and their state of life across all dimensions of welfare and value for human life, including and most especially in the things that make us most fully human: freedom, flourishing, and greatness. And liberation to me is key to what we mean by real human progress. And I think our history bears that out, and we'll probably get into that a little bit more here. And then I can pause there if you wanted to say something, Joy, or I'll just continue with the other the order piece and then hand it over to you.
I mean, I do clearly have a lot to say on both of these, but I do want you to present both progress and order because this is the paradox that we are exploring today. So we might
Sure.
as well have both of these core values on the table.
Awesome. So for order, dictionary.com says, and well, yeah. So I mean, again, many words have multiple meanings. Um, we don't mean it in the sense of a direction or instruction, an authoritative command, but that
I
is,
order you
yeah,
to
because that's really liberal.
I order you to do order first.
But it is the first definition in the
Oh,
dictionary. So, I mean, I guess in a
that's fascinating in itself. We might have to think about how the other definition of order matches onto the dictatorial version
right,
of
yeah.
order. But go
Well,
ahead.
and it's interesting because I mean, not to jump the gun, so to speak, but insofar as the order piece represents a certain side of the political spectrum, they would argue that, that it is more kind of commanding and authoritative. So that is interesting, actually. I guess it's in the root of the word. But I think the definition more that we mean it here is a condition in which each thing is properly disposed with reference to other things and to its purpose. Methodical or harmonious arrangement, and a state or condition generally. And then, uh, wow, there are actually 15 definitions for the word of order, at least in dictionary.com. Another one that I think gets at what we're meaning here is um, prevailing course or arrangement of things, an established system or regime. So that is the kind of official definition. And then I will once again kind of augment with mine. I kind of wrote and even borrowed from, well, I won't preview it, but it'll become apparent in a second. So what I wrote is order, the stability that comes from what works and upon which progress, i.e., positively directed change, is built. It is therefore also a necessary condition or stability that's required for future such progress. Another way to think about it is it's the foundation of learned knowledge, institutions, and practices that further human life and progress, and without which you become unmoored and get directionless change that eventually leads to chaos and entropy. So that's and I'll come back to that one with some further analogies to make the point. But those are my two expanded definitions of the concept. So, with all of that preamble and defining our terms, Joya, I want to hand it over to you because we talked a lot about this offline, but for everyone out there listening or watching, Joya, this was originally definitely one she took the lead on thinking through, and it's been over a year since we wrote this now, so even we were remarking that at least I forgot kind of some of our conversations around it. So I'd love, just for everyone's benefit, a refresh of what you were thinking by this, any reactions to what I just put down definitionally, and just kind of guide us as to why this one as one of the core dualities of human nature at our best.
Sure. And I want to start by saying I think it is even perfectly appropriate for tonight's discussion that you gave the long preamble because I think on this particular duality that you definitely lean much more toward order than I do. And so you gave a perfect demonstration of the orderliness of wanting to have all of your definitions in place. Whereas I am someone who I definitely always ask the big questions. I always want to go toward the first principle questions, but I usually am much more okay to have my definitions be somewhat more approximate, somewhat
Hmm.
more just in the ballpark, you might say, because
Yeah.
for me, then at least like that is a direction. And like if the definition is in the ballpark, then I am moving in the direction of the ballpark. And
Mm-hmm.
that is usually where I am happy to be. But so it's a perfect already demonstration of what we're talking about. And I will share here that when we were going through this exercise of writing our statement, thinking about human nature at our best, this is definitely one of the aspects. Just the fact that we're focusing on the integration of these dualities, just that fact is something that has been so incredibly important to me, certainly even in my work, in my own business. And it's being reinforced by so much of my learning that so much of what constitutes excellence and wisdom in the human experience is all about this integration of seeming polarities or seeming dualities. So to me, just even just having that as a basic framework was so important to thinking about what we wanted to talk about, talking about human nature at our best. But then thinking through, well, which of all of these seeming paradoxes actually merits inclusion in the list? And this is maybe even a teaser for what we're going to do next, which is maybe to think about why we just settled on these, at least for now. In my mind, at least, this is even an open question because in my own work, I've just been cataloging so many of these seeming paradoxes in the human experience. And there's so many others that we could
Mm.
perhaps potentially throw on the table, which I think is what we're going to start to do in our next episode. And viewers, listeners can maybe even help us decide if we need to modify our list and add any to the list. But one of the ones that I thought we definitely, absolutely had to cover, thinking about these seeming polarities that need integration for the human experience broadly, metaphysically, ontologically, and then also specifically for politics, had to do with the basic duality of change and stability. And so much of our human experience is about the need for both change and stability. It's when we think about what makes us human and the obvious paradoxes of human experience, that we are simultaneously creatures of routine and habit, and yet simultaneously always seeking the new and the novel, even if just for the fact that it's stimulating because it is new and novel. Like that is so much of what it is to be human. And I ultimately landed on the specific terms progress and order because I wanted to think about what was the positive vector or valence of these terms, because change and stability, change, we all know, like change can be positive, but change could also be negative. We've, I think, all experienced negative change. And similarly with stability, stability is necessary. It's positive in some instances, but there's certainly instances where stability can be a negative. And so I wanted to try to come up with what were the terms that really captured the positive versions of what was somewhat of a spectrum. And I think it is really important to point out that the flourishing human experience does require some elements of both change and stability, progress and order. That if you go too much in one direction toward change, you end up with chaos and entropy and things that are very bad. If you go too much in the direction of order and stability, you end up with rigidity and dogma and just the unthinking status quo, which in itself is very bad,
Stagnation.
right? And
Yep.
so the poles of these are very bad, but the real flourishing human experience requires you to somehow integrate both of these. And this is a fascinating one where think a lot of the evidence from psychology is pointing to the fact that as human beings, we even have perhaps built-in personality tendencies toward these. So recognizing that all human beings need some combination of both change and stability, progress and order, that it seems that we have, in an inbuilt personality sense, some preference toward one or the other, that we're somewhere on the spectrum. So again, it just seemed so important to talk about both just what it means for human flourishing for Article 1, and certainly toward building up to thinking about what this means for politics and for liberalism in particular.
Yeah, well said. And you kind of called me out. You know me well, in saying that I tend more towards the order side of the equation. I would probably agree with that, although it's
More than
interesting.
me. That's
More than you, yes. You're right. I guess it's always both a relative and a kind of absolute or normative evaluation. But interestingly, as I've thought about it more, and especially embarked on a much more creative and entrepreneurial journey in my life, I mean, actually, as I've looked back on my life, to date, I actually see it as quite entrepreneurial and ever changing. In fact, arguably that's been the only constant in my life. And of course, that's a truism for every human being. But if anyone knows my story, even just, geographically and lived experience, it is always changing. I mean, I've lived in 9 states and 40 years, among other things. So, anyways, point being, I actually see myself as being constantly progress oriented, but structured and kind of grounded, if you will. And
Mhm.
so this having this duality put front and center in our own project and our own thinking about human nature at our best has really helped me to see kind of the integration of the two. And I think we're going to get into just a second some other reasons why they matter. I guess I would just say when I was thinking back and trying to refresh and um, uh, better articulate my own answer to the question of why these two, why does it matter for human nature at our best, and why we highlighted it. I kind of analogize to the process of life itself. I know I was sharing with you, but I mean, and this is the beauty of how the mind works and just knowledge in general, that you integrate across seemingly completely separate and unrelated fields and start to make connections or insights into wholly other ones. But I'm just a sponge for knowledge generally and a science geek, frankly. It's a topic that I feel like I haven't gotten to be as exposed to in my adult life because of my own career, which was not really science grounded. So AI has been a wonderful advancement and tool to allow me to indulge that other interest of mine in a much more direct and personal way. So I've been using it to kind of refresh on some topics. And just it happened that a couple weeks ago I was going down the rabbit hole of relearning kind of where life came from, evolutionary science, kind of energy, and how all of that works. And I realized as we were prepping for this discussion that there's a really kind of direct analogy there, in that life, well, you talked about change and stability as kind of the two universal constants, if you will, or kind of fundamental forces. If you study any science, change really is the ultimate constant, specifically towards entropy, that the universe is ultimately I think it's one of the fundamental laws of thermodynamics, is that that all else equal, the universe uh is moving towards entropy, which is a state of kind of completely diffused and dispersed energy, and ultimately to no energy in theory, or the great blackout or freeze out as they call it, something to that effect. But the point being that it is about kind of disorder, and that life is the opposite of that. That life is a kind of evolved to be, to counteract entropy. That we know it's an entire process of using, consuming, and producing energy to counteract entropy, to create order amidst the ever change and chaos. But we also know that life is itself ever changing. And so as I was going down the rabbit hole, I even was kind of just asking and exploring the question, well, if the universe's fundamental tendency is towards disorder, towards dis dispersed and diffused energy, why would it evolve to create complex organic life that counteracts that? And kind of the ultimate answer, both I and just science, I think itself has come to, is that um, that life is itself is a more efficient form of entropy because it is taking and channeling and diffusing energy much more effectively and kind of, I guess, more of it. It's using more energy more efficiently than if it was just kind of being absorbed passively by inorganic matter. So that is kind of the ultimate integration of how you can square the seeming circle of life evolving from a universe that is trying to kind of expand and disperse into total chaos and and freezing, if you will, or darkness and cold. And so I guess the point being that in that insight we see that life is itself the ultimate integration of progress and order. And so, we as human beings are the ultimate form of life as far as we know it so far. We are the highest, most advanced, intelligent, and evolved form of life. And so, in a way, we are the ultimate expression of this integration between change and stability. And so, just if we want to talk about human nature at our best, this is inherent to our nature that to exist, to be alive, is to balance and integrate the two. And that the beauty of life is that it is a constant, never ending process of balancing, battling, and rebalancing these two fundamental forces. So, in that sense, and now, especially with this kind of greater scientific grounding and overlay and understanding, I really came to appreciate how critical this duality is to life itself, to understanding reality that we live in, and then to uh, certainly human nature at our best, and then constructing a society that reflects that.
Thing I even find fascinating is that as humans, we prioritize the order aspect of it generally. But one way to think about this is that this is the distinction between entity and action, noun and verb. But
Mm.
as humans, I say we always thinkify everything. We want it to be a noun. Even the words I used here were all nouns. We talk about the universe and we understand that the universe in actuality is essentially infinite expanding energy toward entropy, but we call it the universe because we want to contain it and make it a noun. We want to
Mm.
thinkify everything. Everything.
Yeah.
We literally call it everything. Um, and that there is, and we ask questions like, what is the meaning of life? Because and we expect there to be this order that's inherent to life when what really seems to be the fact is that what it is that as human beings, we are the ones who actually get to create the meaning. We get to create the order. And it occurred to me that to your point that if life in itself is, let's say, the most efficient way of ultimately getting toward entropy, and that as humans we're at the highest of that, that as entrepreneurs we are at the highest of that, because as entrepreneurs that's literally what we do. We are literally the ones
Yeah.
who do our best to create the order that most effectively uses energy. So all of us
And creates
entrepreneurs are doing
change.
this to create change.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And really an entrepreneur, positive, kind of productive change, right?
Progress in this sense.
Progress in this, exactly. And that to me, and that was why even in my own definition of the concept, I tried to work in that very point, which is when we talk about progress and order, which I think is a human kind of conception or phenomenon, or at least it's relevant in context of being human and human life, um, that that progress is positively oriented, productive change that serves and expands life. And then what it means to be human life and to live human life. And this ultimately will get into the tie of politics because, as we have argued throughout already and will consistently, we know, and we've been deducing from all that we're learning about human nature at our best, that the fundamental condition to really express ourselves at our best is freedom. And so, even the trajectory of humanity has been one of ever increasing freedom, which has enabled ever increasing flourishing and greatness. So, to me, you can't really even talk about the concept of progress without incorporating these aspects of kind of positive, productively oriented change.
Or it strikes me that it really is ordered change. And even the way we think about progress, the way we talk about our technology, that there's the 1.0 version that is then followed in order by the 2.0 version and the 3.0 version, and that every iteration that we understand that progress is this process toward making things better, that and we know this from our experience as 21st century beings, that new technology enters the market, it solves a problem, but then it doesn't solve every problem, where it creates its own problems. And then so you have to
Mhm.
have the 2.0, the 3.0, but it is ordered change. It is
Yeah,
progressively moving
right.
in an ordered sequence.
Yeah, and this is where then to kind of pivot to the other side of the duality on the order side, where why I call it a foundation in a way. And to use the life analogy again, you need, kind of the fundamental building blocks of life are cellular organisms, and then ATP, which is like the universal energy source, which is essentially just a complex molecule that is very efficient for capturing energy in its chemical bonds, and that is basically processed very easily and efficiently by all living organisms, plants, microbes, bacteria, and animals. And that's why it's kind of considered the universal energy molecule. And that we know at least life on Earth has evolved to be cellular organisms that process ATP. And so, in a way, to me, order is that the foundation for the positive change that is life and complex multicellular organisms of life is built upon the foundation of cellular structure and ATP kind of energy molecules, energy sources. And so in that same way that you can't have further complex life without those building blocks or that foundation, that's to me is what order is. It's the stability of what works for kind of simplistic terms, and building off of that you don't just forget all the knowledge and ignore all the institutions or destroy all that civilization is built upon, and the like, that you have to kind of build up, as you said yourself, technology is itself sequential and kind of cumulative and iterative at the same time. um and so I think that's a key part, is that you need both, because otherwise you are unmoored, and it can go in any direction, which is ultimately, in my mind, directionless.
Well, that's almost the whole point here.
Right.
That that and as you're saying here, that even when we're talking about that which is ordered, when we're thinking about the cell as a structure, this is what has stability, but we obviously know that it's not somehow permanent, that
Right.
it comes into
It
being and
itself,
it will
yes.
go out of that structure will dissipate itself as well. And so again, it is this constant of, well, the only constant is change, but it is this constant motion of the activity, the action, and the progress, the change, and then on the other side, the order, the stability, the structure,
Yeah,
and then we always need both.
right. I don't like to use the word conflict, but that's why I like balance. It's a
Yeah. Well,
constant
I like
balance
even
of
integration, because it's
interplay.
not even balance. Because sometimes when you say balance, it even conjures up metaphorically. I guess because I'm the English person, it conjures up metaphorically the image of like scales that are
True.
completely
Yeah.
imbalanced, where like there's you have the exact
Or 50
proportion amount of
50.
one side on
Yeah,
the other, and
yeah.
it never is that. And it's fascinating to, like, maybe this even ties to the point about how certain human individuals have tendencies in one one direction or the other. And there really is like a healthy spectrum. So we've talked about how, both ends of the spectrum are in their ways unhealthy, and it requires some kind of integration of both change and stability, progress and order, but that every human individual, like there is a healthy spectrum where you can lie somewhere in that spectrum, and it can be different. And so there is ways to integrate it that lean heavily toward one or the other, that still is a perfectly healthy, flourishing life.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so why don't we then apply this now to politics a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think this then takes us toward the direction of politics. And so, one of just, I think, the seminal observations about politics has been that in ways that political structures have developed or evolved in a liberal system, that this preference toward one or the other has perhaps been a way of how we've thought about the two-party system. Certainly, the way when we thought about the original kind of left and right, Whig versus Tory, that the right was the side that represented more stability, order. I mean, we still call them the conservatives, right? It's the one who wants to keep what is there, versus the left, which was on the side of change, activity, more freedom, more movement, more possibility, more experimentation. And that's sort of been a way that politics has evolved. And I really do think that in a proper philosophically liberal society, that you would always want both, and there would always be this variation. And then precisely because we're always striving to find the integration, that it is helpful to have voices who represent more the side of order without collapsing into dogma and rigidity. And it helps to have voices that are more on the side of change and future and progress without collapsing toward chaos and entropy and everything breaking down. That's part of what would make a healthy, vibrant, philosophically liberal society.
Yeah, I mean, if only that was still the spectrum
Mm.
of options and sides we were talking about. I guess that makes sense that historically, I definitely see how that was the history that, like all social movements, you're always going to have people who, whether for good or bad reasons, react against change or just don't want any. And then those who are more for it, also for good or bad reasons, kind of doesn't matter. I think to your point, each human being kind of naturally may lean towards one or the other sides of that. So I think that's probably just innate to the human condition, and then therefore the societies in which we humans inhabit. But I given this insight that we're talking about, that life itself, that human beings as individuals and as a species are really both, that we should properly be an integration of both forces, both characteristics, or aspirations. Even that about a spectrum, that you have to choose one or the other, I think kind of um, sets up a false dichotomy, or it reinforces it in some way. And so, it's an interesting, I think, separate question that we'll I'm sure get into at some point, about how do you construct a politics, or could there be a politics that's less about parties and sides and more about just kind of trying to find this balance and between progress and order, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and like, I don't see it as picking a side, and that I think is even part of the whole problem. That part of our whole problem has been this kind of this tribalism that really is more of our predator prey nature, and not the creator trader. To get back to an older discussion we had, but to bring it to this point, and that as human beings, we are always trying to find that integration for ourselves and for society. And so I think it helps not that you pick a side, but that if you have a certain leaning one way or the other. I mean, and it's fascinating how even just individuals can change in this
Yeah,
over time. I
for
mean, so
sure.
I mean, this is just
There
like
you
a
go.
common observation that typically, like, younger people, like, well, the way this usually shows up in politics, but I think it really maps more to this point about change and
Progress and
stability,
order.
that younger
Yeah.
people are generally more interested in change and have that energy toward change. Whereas then once you approach midlife, you appreciate more the structure and the stability. I mean, I can definitely see even in my own life, it's been interesting. One of the things I've noticed even about, now coming more toward middle age, middle life, there's the one consideration that I think when you do it right, you have started to build things. So then you do kind of perhaps get more protective of the things that you have built. I've also noticed too, like just even in becoming a mother, that like just bringing a new being into the world that is just so in that zone of change that almost like as a parent, you need to lean toward the side of more order just so you can provide that stability that
Mm,
this new human being
yeah.
absolutely needs. So those are just even some fascinating considerations on this point.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I would say my own experience and observations has been perhaps a little bit of the opposite, that
Hmm,
I probably was even more predisposed towards the orderly side when I was younger. Um, and it definitely manifested in my own kind of political leanings, but that I've become much more focused on change and progress and how to create the positive, productive kind of progress, but in a direction that, in my view, is more about opening up more freedom and liberation for more flourishing and greatness than perhaps even the order I thought I was trying to preserve earlier in life. So there's an internal consistency, but the way it has manifested in kind of this question of change versus stability has kind of the relative weightings, if you will, or emphases have shifted for me. So yeah, it's just I think it's just another beautiful expression, both of our examples, of how even we as individuals are a constant, we need another word, rebalancing, but a constant
integration, I like that.
calibrating,
Calibrating.
calibrating or integrating of these two forces. To bringing it back to politics and to your point about the tribalism, yeah, it's I I agree. Well, my earlier point was that ultimately it wouldn't really be a dichotomy per se. It's definitely a spectrum that I grant you, kind of inherently. But at least in the political framing, it wouldn't necessarily be a dichotomy. It would be more about finding kind of the fusion and synthesis between the two, both for each individual and for a political system. Um, but, when I think about our current politics, it doesn't even really map to the current politics because right now we have kind of
No.
right and left, and they don't really, I mean, I guess in a very rough, superficial way, you could say there's still a little bit of the glimmers of progress and order on left and right respectively, but it's really not even that because, if anything, certainly ideologically, the explicit ideologies that the two sides at least claim to speak for, whether they practice it is of course a different question. I think in most Western politics today, and certainly American politics, the left right spectrum is more defined by kind of the emphasis on the collective versus the individual,
Well,
just ideologically speaking. So that's, I mean, there's some validity to that, whether that is the essential question or issue or not. I'm not sure. And then even if that is kind of clarifying on a kind of intellectual level, I don't think it even accurately describes how the left and right in our politics currently practice it, because they're both in many ways kind of just hodgepodge, kind of incoherent melanges, if you will, of a little bit of everything. So it's I can understand the confusion of people trying to make sense of, well, what does right and left even mean?
I was gonna say, I think even what you described as right and left in recent history has only been recent history. I would say even from something like around World War One till about the rise of Trump, so about 100-year period of, let's say, like 1915 to 2015, when it seemed that the left did get more interested in collective action, collective movements, and then the right, people always joke like, that this is that what the the conservatives in America were trying to conserve was something more like classical liberalism. So they were trying to conserve individualism. And so then there was perhaps this more of the duality of, individual versus collective or social. Um, but yeah, but I would say like even that just has been completely upended by everything in our MAGA versus woke.
Right.
I don't even know how that maps on anymore.
Right, yeah. So I guess the point
But
is,
it is fertile ground for us to think about how we make progress
well,
in
exactly,
an
because
ordered way in our given our current system.
right, because in so I guess the point is, you beat me to it. The point is that insofar as we want to get to a better kind of thinking about the real issues in politics, or at least what could be the primary issues in a more philosophically liberal society and governing structure, I think we're putting forth that this duality of progress and order is a good alternative for that, and a good way that could frame this question of kind of political ends.
Well, I wouldn't even put it as an alternative, but as a key consideration. Because to your point, when we had our different polarities or dualities that we're thinking about integrating, we had individual and social,
Right.
along with reason and emotion and mind and body, and this one, progress and order, change and stability. And I think it's important to think about one, the importance of integrating these, and to your point too, that we shouldn't think about it as a divide. I think it is more useful to think about it as a spectrum. And it occurs to me, even if step back from politics to just wider culture, we can think of individuals who are just culturally more futurist. That's just their passion, their interest, where their strengths lie, is thinking more about, how are we futures. And then there are others who are more like nostalgic historians who are all about thinking about, well, like, what are these great things that happened in the past that we should be focused on and, preserving and conserving, right? That these are already sort of tendencies on a spectrum that we see broadly more culturally, knowing that as human beings, ultimately, we always do want both. We want the future and the history, right? And that my sense is that that ought to be a dimension that we bring to our politics as well.
I like that. That's much better framing. You're right. And you're right. In a way, you could say that all five of our both and integrations here in Human Nature at its Best, our Article 1, are are different but equally important considerations to factor into a proper philosophically liberal politics. And I think in a way that's even just a great kind of summation as we close out this focus on Article 1 of how we think about these five dualities that we've these pairings that we've highlighted, and thinking about mapping them into building a better, more philosophically liberal society as core considerations, knowing first principles now that they're core to what it means to be human, and certainly core aspects, if we want to be human at our best, that we definitely want to think about incorporating them as key considerations in our politics.
I think that even provides a nice segue to our call to action for this
That's
week. Did you
right.
want to share
Yes.
our CTA?
Yeah, well, and there was one, I guess the only other closing thought I would say is that to go back to the life and the kind of life and science analogy, if we think of life as ordered entropy, then I think, maybe another way we could say, you put it well, correct me if I'm wrong, but we could think of like a proper philosophically liberal politics would be ordered progress.
Yes. I think I said order for progress,
Order
but you
for
made it even shorter,
progress.
so even better.
I mean, we are between the two of us, we are definitely getting better at being concise. It doesn't always come out in our talks, but
No,
that's okay. We're thinking aloud in public here. When we write it
we're
down,
making progress, which
we
is the important
yes.
part for today.
Yes. So I got your 3 words into down to 2 words. So we'll leave you with that thought here, and then our call to action is and certainly kind of bridging to the realm of politics and thinking more about it, and how we can practice it and apply these ideas to it. We thought for this week we would ask everyone to think of a major public policy issue where there are definite kind of uh, people or sides advocating for both the progress and the progress or the change position, and then the kind of orderly or stable kind of status quo or let's go slow position, and try and find a way that we could find the truth in both sides and reconcile or synthesize the two positions towards a better mutually satisfying solution. Just it's just, I think, a thought exercise for all of us to think through integration and also compromise, which is really the art of politics ultimately.
Wonderful. Well, none of them like spring to mind, so I'm really curious. I'm curious to hear what everyone else thinks of, and I'm curious to give this one some thought because this was one that you came up with and just kind of just sprung it on me earlier today. So I'm definitely looking forward to thinking through this one.
Yeah, well, and to that end, I think Joy and I will both we're gonna do this one along with everybody, and we'll report back with some good findings if we come up with any in the next one. And so with that, this does complete our deep dive into Article 1. And so when
Although
we
we do have one more session. We said we were going to do one more session that was the summary of all of these. Why did we pick these five? Are there more? So
Oh,
that is
okay.
what we have next.
Okay, thank you for the reminder. All right, so not quite yet then. Don't close the book on Article 1 just yet. So next session will be exactly that question. Why did we choose these five? So that'll be a
Because
good.
we are being very orderly here and we are making sure that we put a definite conclusion. And really, I think there is more to say because there is a whole question of are there other of these polarities that are important enough that they merit inclusion in a new draft? So, one of the things I'm going to do is maybe even come with a list of possible suggestions and we'll maybe start thinking through some of those.
Okay, I like that. Well, and yeah, and you raise a good point, which for people who are just jumping in and might have missed our early episodes, but um, we have noted throughout that our statement on philosophical liberalism is a living, breathing statement. When we invite all of you to help contribute to editing and refining and improving, and one we
It
will
is ordered
be
progress.
ordered progress, exactly. And we will be continuing to do the same as we refine our own thinking on all of these topics. And it's one of the ultimate outgrowths of even this entire Substack series. So yes, we will do that. And see, this is herein is another example of how yours and my relative placements on the spectrum have changed, because I'm just ready to go on to the next change and the next section. And you're like, well, wait a minute, let's wrap it all
Yes, we
together
need
nice
to
and
put the
orderly.
capstone on the structure we have built.
Exactly. All right. Well, on that note, we will see you all in 2 weeks. Looking forward to our wrap up for Article 1.
See you all next time.